everyone, welcome back to DS3 Podcast. My name is Cindy and I am a member of the online content team at DS3. Today joining me is PhD candidate Anthony Anderson. Thank you so much for coming here today. And I was wondering if you could maybe give our viewers a little bit of a background on you.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Anthony Anderson. I'm a PhD candidate in political science here at UCSD. And sort of got my start actually as an engineer. I started out that as undergrad at UCLA, and that ultimately was not for me. So I left that for a few years and went to community college for a bit, jumped around so many different majors. So basically settled on actually political science and psychology, one of those two things, although I just did really still like the math from engineering. Eventually, I got a speech debate scholarship to go to California Baptist University. I decided on political science there, but I still took a lot of math classes. It was always a little bit on the fun side, just being that one poli-sci person and these classes filled with engineers and math people that I was able to hold my own. And once I finished up there, the natural next step was to basically, okay, let's combine the math and the political science and go into a PhD program. I was fortunate enough to get here at UCSD, which is a fantastic program. I work with my advisor, Seth Hill. He does a lot of fantastic research. And yeah, I've just been doing research and being able to serve as an instructor quite a few times, even as a grad student.
That's super cool. And also like very unconventional, I feel like. Engineering is like, I feel like almost a complete like 180 from political science.
Yeah, the things that we apply things are definitely different. That said, a lot of the mathematics, I still use calculus, I still use statistics. A lot of people join political science to get out of those things, but I was one of the few people that sort of went headfirst into there to do sort of the tough mathematics.
I see. What type of research do you do now?
Yeah, basically, my main research I do is actually looking at humor. It's a non-conventional topic again for political science. And I will just put out there that, I'm actually not a fan of political jokes, mainly because too many get elected, actually. But I actually started out sort of being really interested in entertainment. And I was actually thinking about how people might be consuming news media for entertainment, actually. My committee, though, was not a fan of that idea. They thought the idea was way too broad, and they were right, and I 100% deferred to them in this case. So I had to simplify and narrow down and basically say, okay, what specifically can I study that, is like a sort of just a sliver of entertainment? So I decided on humor. The first big sort of challenge I had in that research was, okay, how do I go and, measure humor? Because it's just, all of us know what humor is, but it's a very difficult thing to quantify. I use this thing called the Bradley-Terry model, which the way to think about that is think about like a sports matchup where everyone looks at two jokes at a time, and you basically say, okay, that joke's funnier than that one. And you have all these different tournaments, and, we do this, hundreds of times with thousands of people, and it basically makes a spectrum that shows, okay, here's the jokes that did better compared to others, here's the jokes that did worse. And there's, basically a nice objective sort of measure for the overall humor. And then once I actually was able to measure humor, which that was sort of the first roadblock, then I had to apply it to something political. And the thing that I basically decided to use was thinking about how politicians might use humor to navigate scandal. So I made a formal model that kind of predicts that humor is sort of a high-risk strategy. You sort of see a lot of politicians actually use humor strategically. So actually President John F. Kennedy, he had an advisor named Ted Sorensen who actually had an entire massive file that just had all of his jokes and variations of the jokes for every single sort of speech that he would give him. So if he's giving to one audience, he might change a word just a little bit to have maximum impact. And one of the jokes that he did to sort of get out of a scandal where people were saying, hey, your father's very wealthy and just buying elections. He said, I just got a telegram from my dad. And he says, don't spend a penny more than you need to. I'll be darned if I pay for a landslide. Similar example, you had Ronald Reagan actually really struggling after his first debate against Walter Mondale. He was losing his place. He just looked almost borderline sort of senile to an extent. And people were questioning, okay, does he have it in him for the second sort of term? And in the second debate, they actually asked him, hey, is age an issue of this campaign? And he said, look, I'm not going to make age an issue of this campaign. I'm not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience. And actually, Walter Mondale cited that as the time where, he knew that he had lost the election at that point. He saw all the polls snap back and went into a 49-seat landslide.
Humor saved him.
Yep. Yeah, humor definitely helped. He was still technically in the lead, so probably would have eked it out, but it definitely contributed to his landslide.
I see. That's so interesting. So when you quantified it, was it like how did you say this joke is funnier than the other? Is it based on like the amount of laughs that it got, or like situation?
Yeah, that's definitely one way that some people do measure humor in terms of sort of how large people laugh. That said, though, the reason I wanted to sort of stay away from using that kind of metric is that
It's very dependent
there's,
on the person.
yeah, depending on the person, also, like, there's a difference in sort of social laughing versus nonsense. So, for example, I might watch some of the movies I love the most, and if I watch them alone, I might really enjoy it, but I may not laugh.
Yeah.
But if I'm watching with friends, usually a lot of times I
Yeah,
will
yeah.
laugh and, have a
Oh,
good
for
time.
sure.
So I basically just, for any kind of thing I was interested in quantifying, I just put it in a big data set and just said, hey, pick 2 of these, show it to an individual person, and just have them pick the funnier one. And if you do that, 50,000 times across, thousands of people, basically it can, the model can basically make a just spectrum where it says, okay, the ability ranking of this joke, and we can think of that as sort of the funniness. This gets like a score of like 3 compared to this, which gets a score of 1, which means it's less funny compared
That's so
to the others.
interesting. Would you say there's like a problem with like time? Because I imagine that like certain presidents are like maybe the humor has changed throughout the decades and stuff. Like how do you quantify like maybe something was super funny back in the day, but like nowadays we look at it and yeah.
Yeah, it is definitely culture. So if I'm asking people to rate things now, that is
Yeah.
definitely going to be just sort of to this context right now.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the times, in terms of the political jokes I've been looking at, I've always sort of keeping it to just like a few years period, basically,
Okay.
to where I haven't really looked super cross cultural, because that would at that point be a confound. But again, I would not be comfortable using the model to do that. You definitely identified somewhat of a weakness of the model, but in
Okay.
terms of politicians today, in terms of, I've been able to look at Twitter data from 2007 to 2022, is when I sort of cut it off and looked at people that have at least attempted to make jokes, and
Yeah.
sort of been able to quantify, okay, which are the funnier ones, which are not, and I've been able to find that those that have sort of had a scandal, and I looked at sort of when the New York Times first broke the scandal, and sort of just took a sort of pre-measure to see, okay, were these people known for being funny kind of before, and does that affect things? Just have control for that. And also their humor use after. The people that used humor sort of following scandals actually had a better survival rate.
Wow.
This is actually one of the reasons I decided to name my dissertation "Survival of the Funniest."
Wow. So humor is really really important.
Yep. Yeah, I found that a lot of people treat humor as this rhetorical flourish, but I actually think it is a strategic dimension that politicians use and are very very sort of calculated in terms of using.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So would you say is this the first or like main research that you've been working on, or okay?
Yep, this is the main research I've worked on, at least for my dissertation. I have worked on other projects that I can talk about up here.
Yeah.
Listeners.
But what's the process been like? Like how long have you been on it? Are you in like the earlier stages, or would you say you finished it up?
Yeah, and definitely towards the later stage. I
Later
probably
stage.
have about 1 more year, I would say, here at UCSD before hopefully I'll have my doctorate. And yeah, the main thing I need to finish up is I just have some experimental research coming up that basically, I have the social media analysis that looks at survivalship. Now I want to look at the voter side of the equation and just ask actual people, hey, imagine, there's a politician, here's a scandal that they had. Imagine this is their response. Some of them will give some funny responses. Some of them will give less funny responses. Basically see sort of, does the humor kind of, impact, what people think about, the appropriateness of the response, as well as, does this politician understand the gravity of the situation and all those sorts of things.
What would you find? So I know there was like sort of like a battle, like a competition. What was the funniest joke that people said?
So the funniest joke in the larger sample. So at the first time we didn't use political humor just because we were trying to just quantify humor generally speaking, just because it was so difficult to do that just in general. The funniest joke, if I remember correctly, was it was a teacher and they were asking the students, okay, imagine I have 3 bottles and then I have 2 bottles. What do I have? And the student replies, a drinking problem. So that was the one that people overwhelmingly liked. I believe one of the ones at the bottom of the tier, which this one I predicted would be the worst one, was why do giraffes have long necks? Because they have stinky feet. So
I
it's
feel
just
like that's funny because of how stupid it is.
yeah. So it's funny in just how bad it is, but compared to the other ones, it's like
Yeah, compared to the other one, I would say. Which one was your personal favorite?
oh, my favorite one. Oh, there was some. So I did sprinkle a few kind of political ones in there just to sort of see, how people would react. I like some of these what are called ladder jokes, where I basically just swapped out one words to sort of see what I'd find. So one of them was, what's the rarest creature? An honest politician. But I'd also swap that out to see, okay, what if I put the word Republican or Democrat in there? And you saw just a massive divergence based on how people, if they're a Democrat, they were against, if you joked about that. If they're Republican, they were against if you joked about that. And I was able to see that, the rankings were consistent based on party, and that's how I was able to sort of tie that just measurement into actually talk about something political, because one of the things my advisors really wanted was just this idea of, hey, make sure you always tie it back to political science somehow.
Right. What about political science do you think made you decide? Because you talked about hopping around a bunch of different majors. I would also love to know any specific stories that you've had, that kind of if you had any that were defining moments for you that you're
Yeah.
this is it.
Yeah, I will. I'll give you a defining moment as to when I knew I definitely wanted to go into some sort of education, and then I can talk a little bit about sort of why the political science sort of over psychology.
Yeah.
So probably a story that I share in a lot of classes. I think you probably heard this being in one of my classes before.
Yes.
I always try telling students, hey, we understand that you are people first, and you have a lot of other things you're juggling in addition to being students. A lot of students early on didn't believe that I really meant that. They just thought, oh, you're just saying the thing you're supposed to. So I started sharing a story back when I really, really internalized this. So when I was actually at community college, I took a speech class, and it was actually the one that I learned about, the speech debate scholarship that ended up sort of changing my trajectory. And we had to write a speech, and I decided to write on a topic I was really, really passionate about, depression and mental health, something that I had sort of started with kind of early in high school all the way through community college and a little bit beyond. But it was something I really, really was passionate and wanted to write about. So I was so passionate, in fact, I just ran home and typed out, a speech that I thought was one of the greatest speeches that I had ever actually written at the time. Unfortunately, I made a big mistake. I did not actually read the prompt. And when I read the prompt, there's a lot of things that the teacher wanted that I just did not have in this essay. Now, I was a very stubborn person, so I decided, I was going to keep the speech the same, and I just added one little thing to it. I basically said, hey, if me keeping the speech this way makes me get an F, I will effectively, take the F if I can change one heart out there. So I gave the speech. There was not a dry eye in the audience. It was probably 20, 30 people or so. And I got the feedback back, and he just said it was a fantastic speech because I didn't really conform to the prompt. In order to be fair, she did mark it down quite a bit. Now, was it worth it? Well, basically, as I was sort of packing up, going through my things, I sort of turned, and there's this note on my desk that says Anthony. So I opened it up, and it said, Anthony, I have struggled with depression for over 25 years. Thank you for finally giving me a voice. And, at that point, I really realized, okay, let me not worry about the things that aren't going to matter in 5 to 10 months. Let me worry about the things that will matter more in 5 to 10 years at that point. So I really had a sort of paradigm shift and really sort of trying to understand, okay, what is value and what's going to continue to be valuable years forward. In terms of deciding on political science, it's probably right around that time, actually. Really, it just boiled down to, political science gave me an opportunity to do both psychology and political science. I sort of do political psychology to an extent, whereas psychology, it's a lot more difficult. Yeah. You can absolutely study political, topics in psychology, but a lot of people sort of question, okay, why aren't you just, a political psychologist at that point? So it's kind of just the best of both worlds where I could, still sort of
your interests together.
Exactly.
That's a really wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that. And that's maybe we can pivot onto a different section. I know you talked about being a market trader.
Yes.
So I'd love to hear. I personally don't know too much, and I'm not sure if our viewers do either. So maybe you could give a little bit of insight into what that role is, because it sounds really cool.
Yeah, how I got into things, and then maybe I can give a breakdown of the markets.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll start with just how I got into things. It actually was downstream of politics, actually. So in 2023, I believe, I had just finished up my prospectus, which is this massive, big sort of thing in the dissertation where that's your last step before you actually have to write your dissertation and defend. And I was just doing a lot of self-reflection at that time because I had a lot more time at this point. And I was thinking, okay, one of the things about me is I know a lot of sort of book knowledge, but I don't know a lot of, practical skills and things like that and just experience out there. I would talk about politicians, talk about presidents, talk about all these, people doing these things, but I've never been in the ring with them. And I have a lot of students who are like, hey, I want to serve in government at some point. Could you tell me about that? And again, I can, talk about interviews and things like that I've heard, but I didn't have any firsthand knowledge. So what I ended up doing was deciding, all right, I'm going to just travel the country and just try meeting as many politicians as I can over the course of a year and a half, basically. So I met some House members, senators, governors, actually met a former vice president even, but they even said, hey, after talking with them a bit, you should run for president one day, which I don't know if that's the best idea.
I support it. Anthony Anderson, president 2020.
Very, very flattered, but, probably a little bit above my pay grade, so maybe one day, who knows. But,
it's hilarious.
Yeah, in this, I basically noticed there were two types of people that showed up to these events. You had a lot of, wealthy donors there that were basically trying to figure out, okay, which candidate am I going to back? And then you had a lot of younger people who were just dressed up in suits, had a bunch of resumes, and they were just striking jobs, basically. But then you had me who was just there basically, to just enjoy the show and things. And one of the things I noticed was we were at these tables and I was just chatting, and, I can talk a lot, as you probably have picked up on with some of my classes, and probably some of the viewers have already picked up on. But I was just chatting, and there was like groups of people just listening to what I had to say, even though there was these much more interesting people in the room and things like that. And some of the people after was like, I've just never heard someone, younger, just seamlessly jump into a random historical example 1 minute, then get into like a high-level sort of statistical analysis second minute. So a lot of people were just very, unfamiliar with that and just really intrigued by that. And through those sort of connections, I eventually sort of met some people, both sort of in the campaign side of things as well as the donor side of things. That one of them was just a really, really prolific market trader, and just basically gave a lot of pointers and a lot of insight into, hey, if you're trying to compound wealth over the years, this is how you would go about trading. I spent probably about 2 years sort of learning one of the big things for the difference between investing and trading is if you try trading these things called options, 80% of people actually lose money, and 50% of people actually will lose everything.
Sounds like a great deal.
I know. And it's like, I do know of people that, they started with like $100,000 and have turned that into like $80.
Oh, wow.
So it's like a legitimate, there's actually something called Forex trading, which I don't do, but it's even more extreme than options trading, where there's this one person I know of that started with like $500,000, and they basically said, I'll learn the ropes with it. It doesn't matter if it goes down a little bit. In 30 minutes, gone.
Wow.
Just completely wiped it. So if you don't know what you're doing,
don't do that.
So I do not recommend doing this unless you spend,
condone.
a ton of time basically knowing it,
Understanding it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll lose all your money.
100%. I know way too many stories of people wiping out things just because they didn't actually give it the due diligence of learning things.
Right.
One of the advantages I kind of had going into it is by knowing a lot about politics. There's a lot of ways that geopolitics affects the market. So a lot of people
I imagine, especially now.
Yeah, I mean, if you had to buy any gas lately, there's definitely reasons, why that's up, and even just understanding other things about gas. So it probably goes up again because eventually we swap into the summer one actually, and that's going to be, generally speaking, more expensive. But then also things like, semiconductors and things like that. All of these have, some political implications. I still had to learn a bunch of other things. So just natural historic moves to the market, technical analysis, tons of different things that I had to sort of learn to catch up. But basically I got to the point where I could kind of just, win a little bit more often than I lost. And ultimately, if you're moving in the positive direction, that gets you, growth. And that's all you can really ask for.
I see. Would you say your approach is more like you have an intuition based on your experience? So I guess when to buy, what to buy, or is it more so like quantitative, where it's like numbers and because I guess the stereotypical data science approach is we create this algorithm and we make a prediction market. So where would you say you fall on that spectrum?
I would say it's definitely both of those. So
really? Okay.
There's a lot of times where. So one of the big things that I sort of use is something called non-farm payroll numbers. And basically it's just these numbers that come out every single month. And, there's always going to be a low of the month where the stock goes and the high of the month.
Yeah.
And just for a lot of psychological reasons, actually, the market really respects those numbers. So a lot of times you'll see some famous examples, actually. Amazon always would go up to about $200. Every time it hit it just sold off basically every time. One of the easiest ways to actually, they call it the Bezos 200 actually. Eventually it broke that, and then it had to sort of seek a new sort of, all-time high at that point. Understanding those sorts of trends, those are going to be sort of the more quantitative things that you can do that are a lot of times, pretty easy to kind of, figure out. And then other times it's just sort of understanding and being able to sort of assess value. So for example, one of the trades, not even a trade, but just an investment I made sort of recently was Astera Labs. One of the things that Astera Labs did was basically you have all these GPUs, and if you followed anything with GPUs, NVIDIA is kind of the king of GPUs. Yes. But you have all these other companies that make GPUs that no one really wants because everyone wants NVIDIA. But what Astera Lab did was say, hey, we have a technology where we can kind of scale up these GPUs and basically make them almost as good as NVIDIA. And with that, a lot of people weren't paying attention to them, but they went from, I want to say about $80 in sort of base stock to, I think they're over 200 now actually. So if you can identify some of those ones, yeah, you have to sort of sit in there and wait quite a while. So you might be waiting a few years. For a lot of people, it's waiting, 10 years, 50 years. The market tends to go, up and to the right, basically. So just getting in there early and just waiting long periods of time, you can actually make quite a bit of time and sort of compound that and things like that.
Okay, what advice would you give to someone, I guess, who's like interested in going this? And maybe this is not too much of a data science question, but I'm not sure if you will.
Yeah, so for those that are interested in starting this, I would definitely recommend, not trying to trade.
Don't start with
don't
put $500,000 in.
Exactly. Not even like $1,000. That's your point. There's actually something called paper trading, where a lot of different companies, I believe Schwab does this. I think Robinhood has sort of a variation of this, where you can actually sort of practice trade, just to see, are you actually doing a good job? But also realizing that I would say probably 60% of, maybe even higher, maybe close to 75% of trading is just mental. A lot of times, even if you kind of nail the technical side of things and do a great job on the sort of, okay, I've been able to build things up with these practice trades. Yeah. It's just a different beast than we've actually
money.
Yes. Yeah. So there have been times where I've, looked at things, I got nervous and sort of took a small loss, and then if I just waited a little bit more, it sort of, flew up and things like that. There's been other times where I've actually been patient and things like that, and sort of knew when to pull, and it just kept crashing after that, which I was happy about. And other times I waited till things looked bleak, but it shot up sort of at the end. I was able to recover a loss or lock in a gain or things like that. And also just trying to buy more time than you need and really understanding sort of, what you're doing. So for example, a lot of times if I think, okay, there'll be a price movement in this sort of time range, because you have to think about the amount the price moves, sort of the volatility of the market gets factored in. It's almost like you can think of options as sort of insurance for the market, where the more volatile things are, the more likely you are to see a higher or lower price. So those get priced more, and also the amount of time. And if you're able to buy a little bit of extra time, that just gives you a little bit more insurance and things like that. That gets really technical. That's like a super short version, but basically spending probably about 2 years actually learning how to do that. But I would actually probably just start with investing.
Again, don't trade.
Don't trade. If you just
don't start yet.
If you just invest things and sort of are willing to wait a few years, almost anything generally speaking will either recover or go up over time.
Okay, that's really good advice. Okay, so I guess
actually here's a tip if you want to be a millionaire. I'll give the secret tip.
Yeah.
You might not be able to do this right starting up, but if you take whatever you spend on a car payment, I believe the average is like $517 for the U.S., so we'll round down to $500. If you're able to just put that in like a growth ETF, on average, by the time you retire, you'd retire a millionaire.
So it's like small.
Yep. Yeah, putting small amounts in, sort of, every now and then. If you do that over time, you'll grow up by the end of your career. Yep. If you're trying to sort of, rocket up sort of first, that's where you get into trading. But again, really, it's tough to be in that, top 20% that actually makes money, or need to know what you're doing.
It's a high risk, high reward.
Very high risk, high reward. If you know what you're doing, you can usually, limit that risk to, maybe 50-50 on what the really high reward still, just because, there's a lot of patterns of people making sort of bad decisions in terms of the market. And really, if you're on the winning side of a trade, that means there were people on the losing side of the trade. Yeah. So you just have to understand, okay, what do people do that sort of bet against the grain, basically? And again, a lot of people try catching bottoms, but sort of a term we have in the market is it's like trying to catch a falling knife. Just wait for something to fall and clearly sort of reverse, and you actually want to sort of go with the flow, not against the flow.
Right.
A lot of people will try going against the flow.
And catch.
Exactly.
Okay, amazing. I guess that was great info. I'd love to move on to or kind of talk about AI. Okay. I was wondering if you would say that's related at all to market trading?
Oh, 100%.
Okay, then I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, let me give you just sort of a breakdown of how AI has just impacted the market.
Okay.
And then, so basically, if you look at 2025 and you look at sort of the first half of the year, if you look at the U.S. GDP or national GDP, over half of that growth was driven by AI, actually. Mostly data centers, actually. So this actually gets heavily into sort of data science sort of topics and things like that. This year, actually, if you look at capital expenditures, a lot of the top companies, so your Microsoft, your Googles, your things like that, a 77% increase from last year, which is actually probably going a little bit off the rails to an extent, just because most of these companies haven't really seen much of a return on investment other than just sort of, some layoffs and things like that. Yeah. But again, they really think that, if they can win the AI race, and right now I would say Google's actually in the lead. Yeah. There's reasons why that might take a little bit longer to sort of, tease out, but there's plenty of other players you should look at too. But basically, companies are really invested in this, even though they're not necessarily, seeing, the dividends of it quite yet. One really important thing, so a lot of people talk about the AI revolution.
Yes.
If you're someone who's thinking about either, trying to ride the AI revolution up and sort of, use that to sort of catapult yourself into your next position, a lot of data scientists will probably be trying to find their niche in sort of this. Or if you're trying to find someone that's an AI resistant job where it's like, hey, I want the job that's going to not be affected by AI for as long as possible.
Yes,
A lot of people are in that, thing too. I would not look at the AI revolution as just one sort of homogenous thing. You'll want to sort of be able to break it down kind of in phases. There's sort of four main phases. All these phases have sub-phases, but just to simplify, you basically will have GPUs, you'll have storage, you'll have real estate, and then you'll have power. Basically, it will go in that direction. You sort of see, the market kind of rotate in that direction. Right now, there's a movement actually towards storage. Basically, you have to identify where the bottlenecks are. So if okay, we've gotten GPUs to a point. There still needs to be a lot of growth there, but they're now limited by storage. So you see a lot of things moving to storage. This is why names like Dell have popped up, SanDisk, and all those sort of things. So for the market, understanding where the money will move. Exactly.
Invest in Dell, everyone.
Yeah, Dell is actually something where, I actually told the class, it's like, probably one of the safer investments you could do right now is Dell, and it was like $90 when I said this just like a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And Dell just, I think, hit $214, if
Oh
I
my
remember.
goodness.
It hit an all-time high recently, so. And then, the real estate, just because we need to buy data centers in order to, train all these models and things like that. And then just the power to, both power the data centers and keep scaling the power up of everything effectively. So understanding that, AI is going to, not be this one homogeneous thing. And even in terms of, the types of AI, you have the generative AI and sort of more traditional sort of AI models, understanding that's going to help, say, okay, let me put my eggs in this bucket specifically, as opposed to just saying, okay, this broad AI thing, people using it as a buzzword. That's not going to take many people that far, but if you can really sort of specify, okay, this is my niche, specifically like this very narrow thing of AI, that's where people are going to be able to ride the waves up. And, whether that be in investing, whether that be trying to find their niche in data science and training different things, I would look at it, in terms of trying to break up, AI into specific components.
I guess that's so interesting. And I guess I have two questions on that. The first one's more general. I've heard the term AI bubble being used a lot, where people think that like these companies are putting in massive investments in for like things that they don't actually know they get return. This is a personal question for me. I'm just wondering like your opinion on that and like if you think that's a bubble. And the second question, which I can reiterate again in case it's forgotten, is like for someone who I guess is like an undergraduate right now and is in kind of a position where they can kind of pivot and like choose which career path that they should do. Like if they are to, like take your advice and know like specifically, okay, we're on the storage side right now. How should they take that and then apply that to I guess like what field they decide to go in or like maybe if it's like a mindset or yeah.
Yeah, fantastic question. So in regards to the AI bubble, there's like some technical, I won't get into the super minutiae details of this, but there's some technical definitions of bubbles that I don't really think this is a sort of true bubble in the way that like the .com bubble was, or actually there's a interesting story called Tulip Mania from way back in the day, maybe the first market bubble ever, where people were buying these just weird colors of tulips, and they were really interested in these tulips. Were actually, what was this, back in like the 1500s? People were like spending more to buy just a simple tulip than a house, actually. I'm not even like you can Google Tulip Mania.
Like were they like diamonds? Sort of like they were thinking of collecting
No, they're
them?
basically it's just like these weird colored tulips that had these like patterns on them that people just, were going insane over. And like when we need these tulips, people were trading their houses for them. Yeah. And then the market, crashed at that point.
No one's buying tulips anymore.
Yes. I would say that, the valuation of these companies is correct in the sense that AI is going to be this massive sort of, transformative thing.
Yes.
The issue is, I think the timeline is probably a little off to where you do probably see a correction, both because AI is kind of the big thing propping up the market, and just generally speaking, the market probably will have a correction just for a number of reasons, not just AI related. So I do think you will see basically, the AI sort of, going down in terms of investment and things like that. Well, not investment, but in terms of, market expenditures and capital and things like that, people will, pull money from these companies and they'll have a retrace basically. But ultimately, I do expect, this will probably actually be some of the companies that probably recover quicker just because they are things that are really adding kind of the most value to different sort of areas.
Right.
I think the timeline's a little bit off. So not a true bubble, but you are going to see probably a little bit of a retrace that people will probably call a bubble.
I see.
Yes.
I see. Okay.
And then I think your second question was about sort of how to use some of the minutia of, we know that storage is coming up or things like that. How do you sort of, build a career around that?
Mm-hmm.
Really, I would just say, one of the big things data scientists need to sort of think about is, okay, you can build a machine, but you just don't want the machine to just replace your job, basically. If you can figure out certain use cases to where you're more the manager of the machine and he's the one to make decisions, then it really is, a company needs both you and the machine at that point. And, being able to identify where these bottlenecks are, that's going to be the hot spots of where, all the investments are going to go, where a lot more jobs are going to go. So, for example, understanding that, there's still a lot of room for growth for GPUs. And as certain storage expands, you're actually going to see these things rotate back into the GPU sector for a while. Understanding that, okay, how do we power these, companies? Right now, a lot of the stocks are a little bit on the cheaper side still. You have these sort of nano nuclear energy companies, and those are probably going to provide a lot of power to sort of smaller data centers and things like that. Being able to understand some of those things will basically let you know okay, maybe I can apply to this company that, maybe doesn't have the biggest name out there, but it's actually doing something that's solving a real world problem. And you're able to basically start communicating about problems that people actually really care about. So if you can understand, here's bottlenecks. I have something that's a solution, and it could even be, an app to identify certain things, all those sorts of things you can do in data science. That's going to make you just a lot better candidate, being able to speak to actual issues that, are actually affecting things, as opposed to saying, oh, here's this generic kind of AI thing. And that's going to make you look like all the other people that are just using AI as a buzzword. But if you can talk about with specificity, that's going to put you, up into the top 5% of candidates.
So by bottleneck, do you mean more of like a more specific field? Because I guess one piece of advice that I've heard as well is like, you can't really be a general data scientist. You kind of sort of need like a specific field. Is that what we mean by bottleneck? Or do you mean more in terms of like, okay, I see that, we're going to the storage side of things. Like, let me apply to like these storage companies.
Yeah, so more so bottleneck by, at any point, all these things need to increase in order for AI to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And if anything doesn't grow quite as fast as, another one, that's going to be the thing. It's basically like the chain is sort of as strong as its weakest link, right?
Yeah.
So if you can understand, what part is currently experiencing the most problems and holding up the sort of supply chain, you could say, those are going to be the issues that are going to be highest priority to address. Like one of the things that I do is actually do some things called data labeling. And this is something that can actually get into. You can actually just apply online. And what you basically do is, look at different types of models and sort of help correct and train the models and things like that. And that's something that you can just do on the side to make a little bit of side cash and things like that. But I'll notice different patterns in some of the things they ask for. And there's going to be some times where they even say, hey, we really need people to write this, just because there's certain problems that are just higher priority than others. And for those that are good at sort of identifying the higher priority of things, they're going to be able to, even if you're in a company that maybe not is a storage thing, but storage is sort of the issue, you can sort of look ahead and say, hey, maybe we should partner with some of these things and, start preparing for some of these things and looking down the road and basically being able to make a lot of different, basically decisions in order to understand, okay, we might be limited by some other company. Let's sort of, and this is actually one of the reasons why, again, you're seeing, things like NVIDIA and Google just buying up smaller companies that can sort of affect some of these things down the road. And again, they're thinking, decades down the road, as opposed to what most people are just thinking about, okay, what's the next year or two looking like? And you can do that as an individual, though. If you can sort of see, okay, will the skills that I'm doing still be needed in 5 years, 10 years? Those are the decisions that you really want to sort of think through now, whatever sort of level of career you are.
I see. Okay. Do you think, one second.
Of course.
Okay, I would love to also know how you think it'll change poli-sci and data analytics, or if you think that there will be a change or it will be less impacted, because I guess poli-sci is more, I don't know, I imagine that I guess from an outside perspective, I would imagine it'd be impacted less.
Yeah, I can. So maybe I can give just a sort of broad kind of pro and con for everyone, and then I can jump into some of the poli-sci and data science. Thing. So probably the biggest sort of, so I'll start with some of the cons of just AI in general that will affect just lots of different positions.
Okay.
Right now, if you've got up in the news, you see a lot of the tech companies are just laying off lots of people.
Yeah.
Facebook laid off about 10% of its workforce, and about 70% of its code that it releases is actually made by AI already. Microsoft similar 60% of its code made by AI, laid off about 7% of its workforce. Even smaller companies like Square laid off actually 40% of its workforce. So there's probably dozens of these that I could get into. Really, one of the big things that's going to affect for a lot of different positions are going to be the ability to find entry level work. This is going to probably be a little bit more for data science than political science, but if you're doing actual sort of statistical things, a lot of times political science still goes into kind of data science-y sort of jobs. Actually, quite a few people that were at this department that actually work at like Meta and some of the tech companies and things like that. So there is lots of actual, reasons to be concerned. You'll see things like market equilibriums sort of change. So, for example, if you were say a 5 out of 10 coder, and with AI you're now an 8 out of 10 coder, it's going to depress wages actually to where you'll be doing editing work, but you're being paid as a 5 out of 10. So at that point, or if you do twice as much work, you'll probably be expected to do twice as much work. You won't get twice as much free time. Probably. There are some reasons just in general, regardless of sort of what your major is, to sort of be happy. A lot of times you see a lot of doom and gloom. Can we find jobs? What's the market going to look like? Right. One thing that's particularly for Gen Z, you've actually for the last about 2 years, and again this could change if there is sort of a market sort of retrace, but you've actually seen a real growth rate higher for Gen Z compared to sort of previous generations. Particularly the bottom quintile right now. For the last 2 years, it's been really, really good to be sort of starting into the workforce. Probably the big thing that, the number one thing people talk about is, can I eventually buy a house? That's one of the top things to have. I've had students get angry when I, sometimes say that it's actually a little bit easier than, a lot of people think. So for example, 28 years old, that's Gen Z actually right now, the upper end of Gen Z. A lot of us ask, how many 28-year-olds currently sort of own their own house? And I get some guesses like very low percents, actually 38% actually. If I were to ask, for lower income Americans broadly, what percent sort of own their own house, that'd be 47%. A lot of people will guess like 10, 20%. So sort of the baseline, and this is actually for Gen Z, that's actually ahead of where millennials were when that generation was in 28 at that point and sort of coming into things. So there's actually a lot of real wage growth that's actually happening right now. People able to sort of, still upward ascend right now. And I think, you're still going to see those sort of trends sort of continue a little bit until there's, some sort of major market sort of correction and things like that. Again, whenever there's a time of a lot of upheaval, that means there's a lot of opportunity to sort of, ride sort of the things up. As the internet became a new thing, it was disrupting everything. Lots of people were able to ride that up. There's going to be a lot of that sanction for AI and things like that. Particularly those that understand very specific kind of applications to AI and ways that they can sort of grow. So one of the things I would give as advice just for any sort of field is if, it's going to be basically two types of people in these sort of, fields. You'll have people that sort of are dependent on the AI. And you'll have people that sort of learn to sort of still provide value, sort of either alongside or at AI or despite AI. For those in that first group, I think those, regardless of what your field is, they'll probably be the ones that will struggle with a lot of sort of stagnation in terms of growth. There's actually some studies out there from MIT and Stanford that are showing those that are just using AI to sort of think about all their problems and sort of outsourcing their thinking to AI. You're actually seeing sort of a decline in sort of cognitive, use and things like that. That's going to be definitely a problem. I think of it almost as, if you're having a plane and you let the AI be the pilot, at that point, you basically make yourself cargo at that point. And, the AI is choosing the destination for you. You're just sort of going along for the ride. But for those that are able to sort of, build skills and, understand, okay, this is what I still can provide as value alongside AI. I think a lot of those people will do very, very well. Hopefully, people watching this podcast, you're definitely interested in those things. I think that all of you are definitely going to do, fantastic work and things like that as you think through some of these things. One of the big things with data science, again, is just, being able to build AI that, you still have value that you need to put into it. If you think about sort of the legality of a lot of these things, if AI makes a decision, it ends up harming someone's not going to sue, the AI. They're going to sue the person that made the AI, the person that is using the AI. So there still is going to be a lot of room for, human decisions in order to say, okay, what presuppositions do we build into this AI? What are the trade-offs and things like that we use when we're, building the AI? That, there's still going to be a need for humans to think through, particularly on the data science side of things. For political science, I think that, again, you still will see some things sort of get replaced by, AI, but On my side of things, I think that in some ways there'll be more things to study. So, for example, how does AI impact politics? You'll have deep fakes. A lot of people talk about, okay, what happens when ads just become deep fakes, and some of them could be really misleading. As a candidate, now you no longer have to actually make a call and call people. You could clone your voice actually, and basically, call 10,000 people at the same time. And maybe you call a household and their first language isn't actually English. Well, you and your own voice could speak any language to that, household. You'll have people sort of, using AI to say, hey, give me information that I'm going to, base my vote off of. And, we have to think, are there biases in the AI that might skew people to vote one way or the other based on sort of the AI outputs? So there's going to be lots of opportunities there. There's going to be, similar things to data science where, again, a lot of political scientists are just going to use that to speed up on things like, coding or just, some of the annoying things for publishing things. So, for example, one of the things I use AI for is just, read through this manuscript and do all my citations match my bibliography. It's one of the most annoying parts when you have to publish because you have to make sure everything matches, but it can do that, instantaneously almost. And then, one of the things I think both data scientists and political scientists will effectively, have to think that AI probably won't change actually is that AI probably doesn't fundamentally alter human nature itself. A lot of times when there's these new technologies like they have in the internet, you see people say, oh, it's going to, change people. But generally speaking, it just gives people a new avenue to sort of act as they already sort of were. If you look at human nature, it's been pretty consistent for, several centuries, actually. And understanding that, that's going to sort of help people's predictive power for knowing, okay, what actually is AI going to be sort of used for? A lot of people, when, we talk about, the internet, people are like, oh, it's going to solve all these different types of problems. It's definitely lots of, advances that have been made with that. However, on the flip side of things, it was kind of predicted that, like people were going to use the cat videos and, kind of leisurely things. Most people like using leisure, over that. And understanding that, you can realize that, where to either invest, where to sort of look in time. So a lot of those sort of, weird activities that, there's all this hype right now for, oh, AI will solve this, but realize, okay, what are people actually going to use it for?
It's probably not going to be used to solve, like, I don't know, actually.
Well, I mean, there will be some positives. Actually, like in healthcare right now, there's a lot of AI used to identify different treatments and things like that. There's actually a story, I believe it's out of Australia. I might be getting the place wrong, so don't cite me on this. But basically, he had a dog that conducted this illness that there was no known cure for. And he actually chatted with AI and learned everything about all the research and basically found a cure, actually.
Wow.
Went to a university, sort of said, hey, I worked with this AI, and this person had no scientific background whatsoever. And the university looked and said, this actually might be something. So they were able to make that treatment, gave it to the dog, and the dog's fine actually now. So
oh my goodness.
There will be some positive things like that. It's just, your average person's probably not going to be,
using it.
finding things like that. They'll probably be, using it for, other things.
Using it like Google or something like that. Okay, I see. Okay. I guess I'll pivot to, because I know I don't want to take too much of your time, but
much as you need. I'm
okay.
pretty good.
Okay, amazing. I love to ask like a fun question. Like if you could teach a class that it could be related to your subject, but like if it could be about anything, what would you teach it on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would probably pick some sort of life skills class, particularly with a little bit of market literacy, sort of sprinkled in there. One of the things that when I, do surveys or ask students, hey, why did you choose to come to college in the first place? It's, to, get a job. That's like the number one answer, right? But if you look at some of the history of, universities weren't actually built to help people get jobs. It really was just sort of, learning a bunch of information, changing worldviews and things like that. Now, over the last century or so, we've pivoted into, saying, hey, degree should hopefully help for jobs. But sort of the institution, as it's sort of technically built, wasn't originally meant to do that, even though there's been some changes to try, helping that. So a lot of students sort of, get into college and sort of have this kind of regret as to, I was not expecting, this experience. So basically a class that, could go, hey, if you want to be successful, what are the sort of things you could do sort of practically? Probably one of my favorite classes actually at UCLA. It was just a retired engineer, basically just talked about, what he actually did, day to day. And that actually gave me a much better idea of, okay, this is what I would look forward to as an engineer as opposed to any of the actual engineering classes, which were much more theoretical and, you're not necessary.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I would, love to teach some of those things just because, again, there's lots of different things out there that, a lot of people think that, hey, this is how things work. And they get to the real world and it's like, whoa, this is
Doesn't
just
work
not
like
what I
that.
was expecting, right? So basically, yeah, no, I'd love to teach a class like that to hopefully make some sort of positive impact and
Yeah.
things like that. So,
Cool. What would you say is one of those things that you would say, yeah, maybe you expected a certain way, but it was totally different?
yeah, I
in the
mean,
real world?
kind of like some of the examples I mentioned earlier with like, just how the housing market actually looks. A lot of people
Yeah.
think it's almost impossible to do, but you see, almost a majority of, any kind of group that you look at is sort of thriving. Basic things about sort of, how successful the market is, sort of, building wealth and compounding over time. Even a lot of people that, are distrustful of the stock market, a lot of people don't realize that if you're in any kind of pension plan or things like that later in life, those use the stock market to kind of build and things like that. Just understanding how many opportunities there actually are still out there.
Yeah.
Because again, a lot of people right now, it's, you look, you have like the doom scrolling
It,
people,
it
right?
for sure
Yeah.
is.
But
And then you see so many stories of like layoffs and all these things. And
yeah, but still, the good news is, at least right now, maybe 7 years from now or so, things will be a little bit different. And sort of AI revolution is, in full swing and sort of on the tail end of things potentially. But right now, there's still lots of opportunities that, again, a lot of people just aren't aware of and things like that.
Would you say there's any specific opportunity that you can think of?
Yeah, so I have always been someone that, when I think about opportunities, just because opportunities tend to be like very kind of individualized,
Yeah.
you always want to sort of think about, more just keeping yourself open to opportunities. So, for example, like some things I could recommend would be things like, oh, you could look into data labeling or data annotation. Those are things that pretty much anyone can pick up. And if you actually have, some mathematical skills or science skills, you can actually oftentimes, get projects that pay more. So, for example, like it might be like $20 an hour for just basic things, but if you know things like chemistry, calculus, those sorts of things, it might pay like $40 an hour and things like that. And those are things that you can just sort of do on the sides that are there. There's just like long list of those things that you can go into. But really, I'd say just, trying to find sort of your network and surround yourself with people that, A, can sort of build you up and sort of help you and you can learn from, and also those that you can sort of, help as well and sort of mentor and things like that. A lot of times there will be people that, you go on and, help out that, years later they might come back and, they might be, even more successful than you are and be able to help you out and things like that. So
Yeah.
having those networks and things like that, those open up opportunities. And really, a lot of people say something like, oh, follow your dreams. I always say follow your whatever good opportunities are out there.
And they'll lead to your dream.
Yeah, well, one of the issues with dreams is just depending on kind of, what your dreams are. There are some dreams that are perfectly fine to follow, but other ones, like for example, if I wanted to play in the NBA, that would not be a good dream for me just because, I would probably not be able to ever get to that level just because my athletic ability is not all that great. I don't have the height, all those sorts of things for that. On as a kid, one of the things I wanted to do was like, oh, let's make Pokemon real. That would be something where, again, if I could do it, fantastic, but not a dream that would be, worth sort of chasing. But if you sort of have, a set of goals and things like that, and, as you're moving towards that, you see, hey, look, this opportunity is there. Then it's just a matter of sort of being able to evaluate, hey, this is a good opportunity. It's worth my time. Let me take that. And those will sort of, lead oftentimes to, several other opportunities and things like that. It's kind of like when I went and met with all those politicians, just me kind of, talking and,
That just
knowing
opened
all
up
my
a
knowledge.
path they didn't know existed.
Yeah, it opened up the market path. I was actually offered a job by one of the governors there that I wasn't interested in, but you never know what sort of things could, bloom into different things just by having, these conversations and just being, open to just trying new things and working towards goals. Things pop up and things like that.
I see.
And for your dreams, I always say, you should have hobbies and things like that. And a lot of times, pursuing hobbies, that's oftentimes where actually people can get into kind of the dream territory and things like that. Like for myself, one of my hobbies is sort of gaming. And just at some point, I gamed so much that actually I, was able to, get invited to go out to like some Nintendo events and things like that.
Wow.
So those are things where, hey, my dreams as a kid kind of came true a little bit, but more through the hobbies. And so, the way I fund things, though, is more like chasing goals and chasing opportunities.
I see. So rather than having a specific path, maybe, and being like very dead set on it, being open to things when they come. And
I would, yeah, I'd agree. I would have a direction.
have a direction.
Yeah, have a direction, but understand that particularly in times of sort of upheaval, as we're sort of going into, a lot of times you have to sort of course correct. So
I see.
if you have a direction to say, hey, this is where I'm loosely going, a lot of times as long as it's moving towards a successful kind of path, you'll do a really, really solid job of at least ending somewhere that is successful, even if it may not quite be the initial thing that you sort of, thought. So, for example, I thought, hey, I'll do engineering at some point, but I always still move towards that academic direction. So I still, do kind of, political science and a lot of sort of data work within political science.
I see. Okay. And then I guess I have a more personal question,
Yeah,
and you can answer this however you want, but I would love to know, for any advice that you would give to yourself as an undergraduate or your past self.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. So probably a few things. Probably some of the things we've already hinted at a little bit.
Yes.
So definitely just working on networks and just getting to find people earlier, both in terms of those that you can learn from and those that you can sort of lift up and help out and things like that. I would also think about just the importance of being able to discern both truth and value. With truth, it's just important because if you make a mistake and you're not able to sort of admit that there actually was a mistake made, it's very difficult to correct and sort of fix that and sort of correct for a better direction. In terms of value, just being able to just identify where value is and sort of what the better choices are compared to others, because everything's a trade-off. There might be something you could do that is actually valuable, but are there much more valuable things out there that you could be shifting to? So in the market, the way that I would do that is sort of evaluating like a company. And saying, hey, this is undervalued. Let me just park money in there. Then hopefully the company will go up in value. If you're trying to find mentorship, understanding, okay, this person actually knows what they're talking about versus those that, might sound convincing, but they don't necessarily know the things that, and can lead you to a successful thing. And even just in terms of your own decisions. So when I was actually starting grad school, one of the sort of things that is very consistent regardless of, what grad student you are, we don't get paid that much money. We're basically broke. So one of the things I did, which actually brought a lot of value at that time, was I would just camp out on campus basically and find any time they gave up free food basically and just, always show up to these events. Sometimes I'd actually have Tupperware in my backpack and just say, hey, there's leftovers today, take some of this with me. And basically I just did not buy that many groceries or, DoorDash or anything. And every time I did that, I actually took like, the $10 I would have spent on groceries or McDonald's or whatever and just took to just paying off my student debt basically. And basically after 2 years, that actually worked of just sort of wiping out sort of what I had at that point. That was something that, again, made lots of sacrifices at that point, super valuable. Now I don't do that too much just because I have other opportunities and things like that, that are just better use of the time. So being able to shift what you're doing to always find, what is the most valuable use of your time, that's going to be something that as long as you're actively aware of that, and again, you want to make sure you have time for leisure, time for the things that you want so you don't burn out and things like that. But being able to just have that mindset, that's going to be a real important thing. And then just having sort of the self-discipline and self-efficacy to say, hey, I can do this. And just understanding, okay, what are my limits? How can I complement my limits, whether it be with AI, just with teams of people, and all those sorts of things. That's going to be a fantastic thing that you can do as well.
That's a really great piece of advice, especially because I think it's like I've always heard the phrase, like, time is more important than money. And I think that's very, very true.
Yeah, I would say in the terms of investing, you can either sort of, turn your kind of time into sort of value, or you can turn your value into time. And particularly when you're sort of starting out, definitely turn as much of your time that you're able to into as value as possible. And then, on the tail end of your life, hopefully you're able to just, have a lot of value that you can just enjoy that time, basically.
Yes, I see. Mm-hmm. Okay, I guess one final question.
Yeah, go for it.
This is just like, I just wondering if you had any recommendations for what to invest in for
Well,
viewers.
Well, okay, so no financial advice, right? Because I don't want to get in trouble or anything. Yeah, right now, because I do expect a bit of a correction, I would probably actually sit mostly on cash and just sort of wait for things to retract a little bit. But, names like NVIDIA, those are going to be really good for just GPU. Names like, Dell, that's going to be solid for storage. If you got it at the beginning of the year, things like Dell, SanDisk, Western Digital, those sort of have flown through the years. Probably some of the smaller names, which are a little bit more on the risky side, but, should sort of work out, would be your smaller nuclear energy companies. So like Oklo or NNE would be some tickers that you could potentially investigate. And again, I would always really look into any of these, understand what you're looking into, but and definitely don't try
Disclaimer.
Disclaimer.
Huge disclaimer.
Yeah, don't try to actually, invest without knowing what these things are, but, really just understanding, how the market works and just how, if you put money in and just wait a long period of time, it tends to just sort of grow over time and compound and all those sorts of things. I would be mainly looking at a lot of the sort of AI names sort of right now for at least long-term things. particularly probably the stuff, in those sort of real estate and kind of power things, just because we haven't seen as big of a bump for those names
Right.
as we've seen with some of the GPUs, which again still have room to run,
Yeah.
and some of the storage again still have room to run. Micron's another one that has been just flying off the handle
Is that
this year.
storage?
Micron does a lot of mainly storage. That's,
Yeah.
They do some storage. They have some implications for other things too, but they've been really, really growing as
I
well.
see. Okay. Well,
And actually, one sort of surprise I actually have for you. So we talked
really?
quite a bit about AI, and I
Yes.
just wanted to get you a little bit of just a gift as a thank you for this wonderful just inviting me. I've had a delightful time. So I thought I'd do an AI themed gift. There's a movie out there that's super, super popular with AI. It's The
Yeah.
Matrix. You might know Agent Smith from The Matrix.
Oh my goodness.
This is a still from the actual movie where you have multiple Agent Smiths, who's an AI from the movie. And it's actually signed by Hugo Weaving, who was the actor that played Agent Smith.
Oh
So
my
this is
God.
yours.
Thank you so
Yeah, of
much.
course.
I
Thank you
actually
for-
love The Matrix so much.
Oh, perfect. Awesome.
Wow, you didn't have to do this.
Well,
Thank you so
anytime, I
much.
just thank you for the invite.
It
It's
was
been a
so-
fantastic time.
It was so wonderful talking to you. Wow, and I feel like our viewers and I myself have learned so much from this conversation.
Well, thank you. I
So
appreciate
thank
it.
you so much. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe on DS3 Podcast. Thank you so much for viewing as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Oh my
anytime.
goodness, I really appreciate it. Okay. Wow. There's
Yeah,
so many of them.
I know. And I'm a big fan of The Matrix as well.